Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to today's webinar, which is all about how we can switch on to managing debt. So just to briefly introduce myself before we get started, I'm Amy Staines and I am the Senior Financial Education Manager at Better with Money. Now, some of you may have seen some of our webinars before, but for those who haven't, Better with Money provides unbiased financial education to help people understand their finances and hopefully help build some financial resilience as a result. Now, just a couple of notes before we start. As Sarah said, please do ask questions as we go through and we'll pick these up at the end. The webinar today is providing information only, so I won't be providing any financial advice, but rather my aim is to give you the tools and knowledge to help you make good decisions when it comes to debt. And importantly, I also want to highlight as well that Better with Money is completely independent. So if I do mention organisations and websites as we go along today, it's because we genuinely believe they offer valuable services that you can take advantage of and not because we receive any sort of incentive to do so. So with that in mind then, let's move on to look at what we'll be covering today. So today's webinar is all about managing debt, but before we go into that, I do first want to highlight that having debt and having credit can actually be a very normal part of managing our finances. So for example, things like getting student finance to go to university or a mortgage to buy a house or using finance for things like cars and phones. These actually might be seen in some cases as investments in our future, and borrowing money for these things can make them both easier to manage financially and indeed make them possible and achievable in the first place. So debt and credit don't have to be a bad thing, so long as they're used sensibly and you're in a position to afford to make the necessary repayments every month. But unfortunately, debt can become a bad thing if it does start getting out of control. So for example, in cases where you're using debt for extravagant luxury holidays, which would otherwise be beyond your means, or buying items you just don't need, or just generally spending more than you're earning every month, that's when you may start to feel stress and anxiety because of the debt that's starting to build up. And we know from experience that people at any age, salary, and in many different circumstances can get into this situation. But fortunately, we will see today that no money problems are unsolvable, and we'll be looking at a debt action plan to get yourselves back on track. So what are we going to cover? So first of all, we'll look at some statistics around personal debt in the UK and looking at why it might start to become a problem. We're going to be putting a plan in place to become debt-free, which requires you to prioritise your debts, work out your budget, carry out money-saving actions, and also find ways to maximise your income. And we'll also look at how you can reduce the cost of debt, and we'll then finish off by looking at where to go for help if you need further support. But first, let's just set the scene and look at a few statistics around debt in the UK. And these do highlight some of the reasons why debt can become a problem. So according to the Money Charity, at the end of last year, the average debt per adult in the UK was £4,123, and that excludes mortgage debt. So if we take a look then at where some of that debt might actually come from. So the first being expenditure on credit cards. Now, lots of people use credit cards to buy things. And in fact, the Money Charity say that credit card debt averaged £2,453 per household or £1,295 per adult in December 2023. And, you know, it's one thing if you have a solid strategy to pay this off, but it's where you continually spend on credit cards without a plan that it can start to become problematic, particularly when interest rates on credit cards are kind of 20% plus. Now, I also want to briefly mention that it is getting easier to access credit as well, with buy now, pay later schemes cropping up a lot at the moment. And there are lots of statistics on this point as well, but I did read recently that nearly 50% of UK adults have now used buy now, pay later schemes. These schemes aren't currently regulated by the FCA, but they are gaining a lot of traction. And the question, you know, is that I'm thinking, do we need more regulatory oversight to keep some of this under control? But that's just another point there, kind of alongside that credit card debt point. And if we move on to the next box, more and more people are feeling the pinch when it comes to utility bills. And Debt Justice, this is a charity that campaigns against unjust debt. They found that over 12.5 million adults in the UK are actually falling behind on bills, which is arguably unsurprising given their cost. And if we look on the slide, the Money Charity suggests that an average UK household spends £3.48 on water, electricity and gas every single day. And other bills like broadband, council tax, mobile phone bills will sit on top of that figure as well. So it does quickly add up. And for anyone with a family, apparently the average couple will spend £25.28 per day to raise a child, which equates to over £165,000 up to the age of 18. And again, this only adds to that financial pressure. Now, not having any emergency savings is the next point we're going to move on to. And in times of trouble or increased costs, 39% of UK households had either no savings or less than £1,500 in savings. And this figure is actually 79% for single parent households with children. And in this case, people might find themselves turning to debt and credit if unexpected costs do come along and they don't have the savings to cover it. And last but by no means least, 24% of people have very low confidence when managing their money and wouldn't know how to manage debt if they did get into it. And this is one of the points that I'm really hoping to change in this session today, to give you some tools and knowledge to help tackle any debt if you have it and to start taking back control. So these are some of the reasons you might find yourself getting into debt. But I do just want to highlight to anyone that is struggling with debt that you really are not alone. And these statistics show exactly that, because it is a challenge for so many. But as I said before, there are things you can do to make it better. And this is how we're going to do it. So this is a plan we're going to follow. And we're going to go through each step in turn, starting with step 1, which is prioritise your debt. So, first step of the process is simply knowing what debt you have. Now, it can be very easy to bury your head in the sand and let debt just exist in the background. But this step is about really uncovering those debts and gaining clarity on exactly what they are, what they're costing, and when they need paying back. And this will help you start to take control and work out a plan of what to do with them. So I encourage you to spend some time writing down any money you owe. And you can use a list like the one on the slide here, which shows who and what you owe, the minimum payment you need to make each month, what the interest rate is, and when you need to pay it. Now, in the interest rate column, we refer to the APR, which stands for annual percentage rate. Now, this is the cost of borrowing money over a year, and you will often see an APR figure if you have a credit card or loan, for example. And the higher the APR, the more interest you're paying. And the more interest you're paying, the longer it's likely to take you to pay it off. But if you have a look at a recent statement or the credit agreement from when you signed up, this should show you what the APR is for that particular debt. And once you've made this list, then you need to determine whether that debt is a priority or a non-priority debt. So just to give you an idea then, priority debts are the ones that carry the most serious consequences if you don't pay them. So they're things like mortgages and rent and bills, because if you didn't pay these, then you do put your living arrangements at risk. So, having a secure place to live with heating and light is essential, making these priority debts. On the other hand, non-priority debts are those where you would face less serious consequences if you didn't pay them on time. So things like overdrafts, loans, credit and store cards, and money borrowed from friends and family as well. Now, you wouldn't be popular and you may pay more interest and your credit history might suffer, but you wouldn't lose that essential part of life. But if you need some extra help prioritising debts, there is a fantastic tool on the Money Help website, which I have linked on the slide here. And then once you've decided whether your debt is a priority or not, you should then rearrange that list of debts in order of priority and the highest interest rate as well. So this will mean that once you've done this exercise, that your highest interest rate priority debts will be at the top of the list, And these are the ones you want to concentrate on paying off in full first and foremost. So we'll now move on to the next step. This is all about working out your budget. And this really means getting a handle on what you have coming in each month compared with what you're spending. And to help you do this, you could use one of the free budget planners we have available on the Better with Money website. And you can find those under the employee resources section as shown on the slide, or see if your banking app offers something similar. There are other kind of budget planners out there as well. But when you're completing your budget, try and note down everything you spend for a month. So include those impulse purchases. And I find the best way to do it is to look back over the last couple of bank statements and credit card statements so you can see all of those extras that you might have forgotten about. And it's also important as part of this exercise to remember those one-off expenses as well. So things like car services and annual celebrations or birthdays. So just to give you an example, if you know your car service or MOT or tax is going to cost you £600 across the year, add £50 a month onto your budget. And actually, by breaking down annual costs into monthly figures, it will help you to see what you've got left to pay off debt with. And it also makes one-off expenses seem a bit less intimidating as well. But once you've written out your budget, step 3 on the debt action plan is to see if you have any monthly costs that you can reduce to free up more money to then start paying off your debts. And there are loads of different areas of expenditure you can look to cut back on. So let's just go through a few of these. So firstly, look at whether there are any non-essential items you can cancel to save money. You know, you might have multiple subscriptions to music, TV, and film sites where just one would do in reality, or perhaps a gym membership you never use. And I try to look at my direct debits and standing orders twice a year, and I usually find something that I can cancel. You may also be able to cut back on things like takeaways or take out coffees. And I'm not saying you have to cut them out completely, but if you're getting multiple coffees or takeaways a month, could you cut back and could you maybe just have one instead? Now, the next thing to work through is your bills to see what these are costing and whether you might be able to get a better deal. And I find the best way to do this is to use comparison websites like Money Supermarket or Compare the Market. And these usually include deals from lots of different providers, and you can use them for broadband, mobile phones, energy, and insurance, just to name a few. But once you've found another deal, it's actually worth contacting your existing provider to see if they will actually match that best price you've seen. And 9 times out of 10, they will, but only if you ask, because they won't do it automatically. And actually, whilst I was preparing for this webinar, I decided to give my mobile phone provider a call to test out this theory. So I was previously paying £27 a month, and I found another deal elsewhere for £13 a month. And my existing provider actually agreed to match this. So I've saved £14 a month, which is £168 a year. And all that took me was 15 minutes on the phone and a bit of research. So it just goes to show a little time spent on these things can go a really long way in terms of savings. But if we move on to the next point, I just want to share a little tip when thinking about insurance in particular. Whether that's home insurance, contents, car insurance, it's worth taking your policy off auto renew because this will lessen the chance of your insurer just increasing your price without you realising. And in general, it's worth keeping a note of when particular costs will become due for renewal. That allows you to really get ahead of the game and do some research and try to lock in a better deal going forward. Now, the next point relates to council tax, which is often one of the larger bills you will have to pay every month. So it's worth checking this and asking yourself, are you in the right council tax band or are you actually paying too much? And you can check this on the website shown on the slide. It's worth checking similar properties in your area as well, perhaps your neighbours, so you compare. And if you think your council tax band is too high compared with similar houses in your area, you can appeal it to see if you can get it reduced. You might also be able to get reductions if you receive universal credit or someone in your house has an illness like dementia or Alzheimer's. And it's also worth flagging that you can get 25% off your council tax bill if you live on your own. So perhaps you've had a change in circumstances, which means you're now living on your own. This is an area where you can save money. And On this point as well, the final thing I just want to say is that some councils will also allow you to spread payments over 12 months rather than the usual 10 months. You often have to ask, but actually this can be a way of reducing the monthly payment and just improving your cash flow a little bit. Now, just moving on to the next point then, energy bills are a challenge for lots of people and they've been become increasingly so over the last year or so, but there is support out there. So government support may be available for those on low incomes or those receiving benefits. But also your energy supplier may offer grants if your energy bills are in arrears and you're struggling to pay. And on the slide, I've included some of the energy suppliers who have set up charitable trusts to provide additional grants, which might help you if you need it. And you don't necessarily have to be their customer in order to qualify for these grants. So, for example, the British Gas Energy Trust has grants available to all, so it is worth contacting them to see if you qualify. And you can also visit the Step Change website link on the slide as well to find out more. And last but not least, don't forget any discounts or cashback offers available to you through work or reward schemes. You can look online to see if there are any relevant discounts if you're shopping, but just be careful to ensure those websites are legitimate. But every penny saved is another penny you could use towards paying off any outstanding debt. So moving on to step 4 then of the debt action plan, this is all about maximising income where possible. And there are 4 key areas that I want to highlight. So the first, state benefits. It's worth checking whether you're entitled to any state benefits. The main one here is universal credit, and this is designed to help those on a low income and those with savings less than £16,000. And it's designed really to help with living costs. The easiest and quickest way to see which state benefits you may be entitled to is to go on to the Entitled To website, and you just fill in the questionnaire about your personal circumstances. It's really quick, really easy. And if it says that you're eligible, you can then apply on the government website. So that's state benefits. It's also worth seeing if you're eligible for any charitable grants for people in financial difficulty. So first place to look would be the IC Benevolent Fund or Institution of Mechanical Engineers Support Network, wherever you're a member. You can also check the Turn to Us website, which I've also linked on the slide. And this has a grant checker and searches over 1,700 available grants and takes less than 5 minutes to do. So again, another option for you there. The next point is all around generating additional income from selling things you already own but don't need anymore. And this can actually be hugely profitable, and there are lots of new apps and websites available to help us do it. And I've named a couple of the more popular ones, which you could take a look at. And finally, check out the rent-a-room scheme. And this basically allows you to rent out furnished accommodation in your home and earn up to £7,500 per year tax-free. And I've added the website so you can find out, again, a little bit more about it. But these are just a few ideas for maximising your income. But, please do feel free to type in the chat or Q&A if you do have any other ideas, which we can also share. Now, just moving on to the next slide then. So by doing steps 1 to 4, the aim is that you'll have managed to reduce some of your outgoings or increase your income to free up some more money to start paying towards your debt. So at this point, let's go back to that list of debts from step 1, and let's use that extra money that you freed up to start paying off those priority debts and the debts with the highest interest rates. And this doesn't just mean covering that minimum payment. And I just want to demonstrate here why paying above the minimum payment is so beneficial. So let's just take a look at this example on the screen. So here I've used a debt calculator. This is the one on the Better With Money website under the Employee Resources section, which you're free to use as well. But this shows that if I have a credit card, and it's an example, but with a £2,000 balance, with an interest rate or APR of 20%, and I pay the minimum payment of £40 a month, it will take me 8 years to pay off. But you will see at the bottom, if I paid just £8 more every month, So that's £8 more than the minimum payment. So I'm paying £48 a month. I actually pay off this debt much quicker, and I also save myself over £600 in interest. So just shows that paying over the minimum is a really good strategy if you can do it. But remember, you must pay the minimum on all outstanding debts to avoid falling behind. Otherwise, those missed payments will be noted on your credit history and they may start to affect your credit score. And setting up direct debits for debt payments is a good way to avoid missing payments in that way. They go out of your account automatically, so there's no risk of you forgetting to make those payments manually. But yeah, targeting priority debt first and really trying to pay more than the minimum if you can is really the point of this slide. So moving on to the last step of the debt action plan, this is all about looking if you can reduce or consolidate your debt to bring down the interest payments you are making. Now, the first point is about using savings to pay off debt, particularly where the interest rate on the debt is more than you're receiving in interest on your savings. Now, while savings rates have gone up over the last few years, it's still very likely that the interest you're paying on your debt will be more than the interest you're earning on savings. So, for example, the average rate on easy access savings accounts was 3.2% as at the 1st of March this year, compared with the average credit card APR of 35%. Now, overdrafts may charge interest of up to 40%, and other loans might be kind of 10 to 20%. But you can see the impact of saving versus the charges on the debt in money terms in the box on the right-hand side of the slide. But it must be acknowledged that people who are struggling with debt don't necessarily have savings, and I do understand that. So instead, you could look at how you can bring your debt together under one loan or card to reduce those interest payments. And the lower the interest rate, the more of your money is going towards paying off the actual debt rather than just paying the interest. Now, for those people with a good to excellent credit score and total debt of under £5,000, a 0% balance transfer credit card may come out the best. This can allow you to basically transfer your existing debts to the card. You probably will pay a small upfront fee for doing this, usually up to 5% of the debt you're transferring, but then you pay no interest for a set period of time. And the better your credit score, the more likely you are to get one of these cards, and the longer the interest-free period will be. But the golden rules of balance transfers are to never miss a monthly payment, to try to pay off that balance before that 0% period has finished, and don't withdraw cash on the card either, because it is often quite expensive to take cash out. But when used correctly, this can be quite a cheap form of borrowing. But alternatively, if your total debt is more than £5,000, you could be better off going for a cheap long-term loan deal, as there may be no upfront fee to pay in this case. But with both of these options, as always, it is worth shopping around to find the best loan, the best credit card deals with the most attractive rates. Because remember, the lower the interest rate on your outstanding debt, the more of your monthly payment goes towards paying off the actual loan amount rather than just that interest payment. And it will also be cheaper overall for you to pay it off. Now, just before we move on to the summary slides, a really important point is that you should always use an eligibility checker before applying for a credit card or loan. The reason being is that if you're rejected for a loan or credit card, then this will be recorded on your credit file, and this can make it even more difficult to obtain further credit in the future. The eligibility checkers on the Money Saving website are really useful to give you an idea of whether or not you'll be approved before you apply, and I've linked them on the slide. You just need to complete your details and they will identify what you might be eligible for based on your own circumstances. So bringing it all together then, this is a summary of how you can plan to be debt-free. So writing down what you owe and prioritising your debts, working out your budget, seeing where you can reduce costs and maximise income, trying to pay off more than that minimum payment where you can, and also consider where you might be able to consolidate debt using lower interest credit cards or loans. But sometimes financial situations can feel too overwhelming and be quite difficult to work it out by yourself. So, if you're in the case where even after following this plan, you can't afford those minimum debt payments, or you're receiving letters or court action, or maybe your credit score is low, then there are options available to you to get help. So let's just look at where you can get some help and support. So the first place you can turn to is either the IC Benevolent Fund or Support Network. The iSpend Fund has a 24-hour support line in case you or a member of your family wants to talk, and can give you free, practical and tailor-made advice as well on how to help manage your debt and finances. And the Support Network works closely with PayPlan, who offers you and your family confidential debt and budgeting advice and solutions. So great support out there. So do get in touch with them. But if for any reason you don't want to approach the funds directly, then do look at some of the other organisations out there. So I've listed these on the slide, places like Step Change, Citizens Advice or National Debtline. They all have qualified debt advisors whose job it is to help you, and they provide your services for free. The one thing I just want to urge you, and I'm conscious of the time and that we want to get on to questions, but just please don't be tempted to respond to companies who advertise debt solutions on the radio or in the newspapers, because they may be trying to sell products to you. So it might not be in your best interest. So these kind of free but heavily qualified debt services can be much better to start you off. But I appreciate we've covered a lot of information today. So in this slide, I've just brought it all together. You'll be able to refer back to this after the session, just to kind of sum it all up and hopefully help you regain some control over your finances and get back on track. But just to reiterate, before we move on to questions, I'm just going to finish on this point, is that if you do need help, please don't be afraid to ask. 80% of people who sought debt advice felt happier after doing so and more able to cope. So there's help out there. So please do use it. But thank you all for listening. I hope that's been useful, and I will now hand back over to Sarah. Thanks so much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Amy. Plenty of really useful and helpful tips there. So for our first question, are some loan providers better to go with than others?
It's a really, really good question. And I think the first thing I want to say here is that it's firstly just important to make sure they're regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority to offer debt products. So that's kind of the first thing you'd probably want to check. But provided they are, the best provider for you will be based on which one is offering you a loan that's suitable for you over the term you want and at the lowest possible interest rate. So there isn't necessarily a one size fits all, because it does depend on your unique circumstances. But if we go back to those eligibility checkers that I mentioned, like that one on the Money Saving Expert website, you should hopefully be able to get a bit of an indication of, what might be a good provider to go with. And it will also only show those FCA regulated firms on there as well. So hopefully that'll help.
That's great, thank you. And I can see someone asking, where can the recording be accessed? That will be sent out to all delegates after the event, once the recording has been processed. Moving on to the next question. My recent ex-partner has a lot of debt. We've lived together for years. Is the debt likely to affect me now we've split?
Yeah, another really good question, and certainly not the first time I've heard this being asked. So generally, you're only liable for debt that you took out together in joint names. So even if you were married, if the debt is in the other person's name, they alone are responsible for that. But joint mortgages and joint loans, for example, you will be responsible for. Any joint credit cards, however, you won't, because there will always be a lead name and it's generally that person that's responsible. Now, if you do split up and you've ever had a joint debt, you will be financially linked on your credit reference file. So any financial action they take could affect your score. But as long as you have no current joint debt, it's worth getting in touch with the credit ratings agencies and asking them to formally unlink you from your ex-partner. just to ensure that any debt your former partner has in the future won't affect your credit rating. But in general, yeah, it's only really that debt that you took out together. But there are kind of things you can do to make sure you're unlinking yourself from that ex-partner. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. And just one more question. How long does it take to improve credit rating once you're out of debt?
Yeah, okay. Another really good question. So any missed payments on credit cards or any formal debt consolidation plans you get through a debt counsellor, so something like an individual voluntary arrangement, for example, this will stay on your credit file for up to 6 years after your last payment. So 6 years is often the timeline that credit reference agencies will look back over. However, provided you manage your finances sensibly and don't rack up kind of further large debts or missed payments, and you haven't had any of those kind of formal debt arrangements occur, your credit score should gradually improve after around 6 months. So say, yeah, you've missed a payment in the past, for example, then hopefully 6 months, you should start seeing some improvement.